Sign here. Take your
15,000
and get out of our lives.
The words cut through Ethan's pride like a blade. 3 years of marriage erased, replaced with a figure so insulting it reeked of humiliation. Jessica folded her arms, lips curling into a contemptuous smile. You should be grateful. With what you brought into this marriage, 15,000 is more than generous. Her father, Harold, chuckled coldly, his tone dripping with mockery. Exactly. This burden has weighed on our family long enough. At last, we're free of him. Before Ethan, they had placed a flimsy plastic pen, its ink already smudged, an intentional gesture, as if to emphasize his supposed worthlessness. His fingers brushed over it slowly, while inside his jacket pocket rested his Mont Blanc. And something else. Something none of them knew about. 15,000, he repeated, his voice low, trembling not with fear but with fury barely contained. Take it and start over somewhere far away, Jessica said, her gaze sweeping over him like one would look at a beggar on the street. You'll never get a better chance than this. Around the table, every pair of eyes gleamed with disdain, her father, his arrogant lawyers, and Marcus, her lover, smirking in smug triumph. None of them knew Ethan's secret. But what happens when the man they dismissed as worthless reveals he's been holding all the cards? 3 years earlier, the small coffee shop on Valencia Street hummed with the gentle morning chatter of San Francisco's working class. Ethan had chosen this place deliberately, far from the gleaming towers of the financial district where his real life existed. He sat in the corner booth, wearing clothes he'd bought specifically for this charade. A faded Giants t-shirt with a small hole near the hem, jeans that had seen better days, and scuffed sneakers that looked like they'd walked 1,000 miles. His fingers wrapped around a chipped ceramic mug as he waited, studying the other patrons. Construction workers grabbing quick caffeine fixes, a few students bent over laptops, real people living real lives, unlike the gilded cage he'd grown tired of. The door chimed and she walked in. Jessica Mills moved through the coffee shop like she owned it, despite being clearly out of place. Her designer jeans probably cost more than most people here made in a week, but she'd tried to dress down, emphasis on tried. The Hermes bag slung over her shoulder gave her away immediately, as did the way she wrinkled her nose slightly at the worn vinyl seating. You must be Ethan, she said, sliding into the booth across from him. Her smile was polite but guarded, the kind rich people wore when they were slumming it. I have to admit, when my friend Sarah told me about you, I wasn't sure what to expect. Ethan had crafted his story carefully. Unemployed IT intern, he said with practiced sheepishness. Just got laid off from a startup that ran out of funding. Living in a studio apartment in the Tenderloin and eating ramen more nights than I'd like to admit. Every word was a lie, but he delivered it with the resigned honesty of a man who'd had his dreams crushed by Silicon Valley's brutal reality. Something shifted in Jessica's expression. Not sympathy exactly, but intrigue. That's terrible, she said, and he could almost see the wheels turning in her head. Here was her chance to rebel against everything her father represented, to choose love over money, to be the heroine of her own romantic story. What Ethan didn't anticipate was how quickly the fairy tale would curdle. Within weeks of their first meeting, Jessica had introduced him to her world, and her world had immediately tried to reject him like a bad organ transplant. So this is the famous Ethan, Harold Mills had said at their first family dinner, his voice dripping with the kind of disdain usually reserved for something found on the bottom of a shoe. The family patriarch stood in his Pacific Heights mansion, surveying Ethan like a general inspecting a disappointing recruit. Jessica tells me you're between opportunities. The other guests at the dinner party, lawyers, judges, political donors, had barely bothered to hide their amusement. How romantic, one of Jessica's society friends had whispered loud enough to be heard. She's doing charity work now. The laughter that followed was soft, cultured, and absolutely vicious. Ethan had smiled and nodded and played his part perfectly, but he was learning. Every slight, every dismissive glance, every barely concealed sneer was being catalogued and stored away. These people thought they were superior because of their bank accounts and their bloodlines, but they had no idea who was really sitting at their table. The transformation happened gradually, like watching a time lapse of fruit rotting. What had started as Jessica's romantic rebellion against her father's expectations slowly morphed into embarrassment and resentment as the reality of her choice settled in. Ethan first noticed the shift at Jessica's birthday party 6 months after their wedding. The event was held at Harold's Country Club, old money San Francisco at its most concentrated. Jessica had insisted Ethan come, but the moment they walked through the doors, he understood he was there as an exhibit, not a guest. "Oh my God, Jessica, is this really him?" One of her sorority sisters, Brittany something or other, approached with the predatory smile of a shark scenting blood. "I saw the wedding photos on Instagram, but seeing him in person is... wow." She looked Ethan up and down like he was livestock at auction. "How... ethnic..." Jessica's laugh had an edge to it. "Brittany, please." But she didn't defend him. She didn't shut it down. She just moved them along to the next group of well-wishers, leaving Ethan to follow like a trained pet. The real blow came during the gift-opening ceremony. Someone had given Jessica a Hermes Kelly bag, $20,000 of leather and status wrapped in tissue paper. As Jessica lifted it from the box, another guest called out, "Maybe your husband can get you the matching wallet for your anniversary." The laughter that followed was sharp and cruel. Ethan watched his wife's face flush red with embarrassment. Not embarrassment for the cruel joke, but embarrassment that she couldn't afford such things. Embarrassment of him. Harold materialized at Ethan's elbow like a well-dressed vulture. "You know, son, there's a young man here tonight I think Jessica should meet. Marcus Wellington. Owns 3 successful real estate companies. Stanford MBA. About your age, but he's already established himself quite well." The older man's voice was casual, conversational, but his eyes were calculating. "Sometimes people grow in different directions, if you know what I mean." That night, Ethan started carrying his phone in his shirt pocket, recording app activated. If they wanted to play games, he'd make sure he knew all the rules. Jessica became increasingly cold over the following months. She started going to events alone, telling people Ethan was busy with work, when everyone knew he was still unemployed. She'd come home from these gatherings with stories that were clearly meant to make him feel inadequate. "Marcus just bought another building in SOMA, she'd say while putting away her jewelry. "His portfolio is worth over $50 million now. Can you imagine being able to just buy buildings? Like normal people buy groceries?" Ethan would nod and make appropriate responses while mentally adding another entry to the growing file his legal team was building. Every slight, every manipulation, every carefully crafted attempt to make him feel worthless was being documented with the precision of a military operation. The charity gala at the St. Francis Hotel was supposed to be Harold's triumph. 500 of San Francisco's elite gathered to celebrate his 30-year legal career and raise money for disadvantaged youth. The irony wasn't lost on Ethan as he walked through the ornate ballroom, watching these people congratulate themselves for their generosity while treating him like he was invisible. Harold took the stage just after the main course, champagne flute in hand and confidence radiating from every pore. The speech started predictably enough, thanks to supporters, stories of legal victories, humble appreciation for the community's trust. But then his eyes found Ethan in the crowd, and something shifted. "You know, as I look out at all of you tonight, I'm reminded that we're all part of families. Some families we're born into, some we choose." His voice carried perfectly through the sound system, reaching every corner of the ballroom. And sometimes, as parents, we have to watch our children make learning experiences. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Jessica, seated at the head table, had gone very still. My daughter Jessica is here tonight, and I want to acknowledge that young people sometimes need to explore certain paths before they find their way to where they truly belong. Harold's smile was paternal and understanding, but his words landed like precision-guided missiles. We all make mistakes in our youth. The important thing is having the wisdom to recognize them and the courage to correct course. The applause that followed was polite and knowing. 500 people had just watched Harold publicly signal that his daughter's marriage was a temporary embarrassment that would soon be rectified. Ethan felt every eye in the room on him, could practically taste the mixture of pity and amusement in the air. Jessica sat frozen, her face a mask of mortification that had nothing to do with defending her husband and everything to do with being publicly associated with her mistake. When the speeches ended and the dancing began, she made her way to Ethan's side with the mechanical movements of someone in shock. "We need to talk," she whispered. They found a quiet alcove near the hotel's lobby, away from the celebration. Jessica's composure cracked the moment they were alone. "I can't do this anymore, Ethan. I can't keep pretending this is working." "Pretending what's working?" he asked quietly. "This whole situation." She gestured vaguely back toward the ballroom. "My father just humiliated me in front of everyone I know. Do you understand what that means for my reputation? For my future?" Ethan studied her face in the dim light. 3 years of marriage, and she was worried about her reputation. Not about him, not about what they'd built together, but about how his presence reflected on her social standing. "I see," he said simply. "I don't think you do see. I don't think you understand what it's like for me, having to explain why I'm married to someone who can't even—" She stopped herself, but the damage was done. "Can't even what, Jessica?" "Can't even provide for me the way I'm used to being provided for." The words came out in a rush, like poison finally being released from a wound. "I tried to make this work. I really did. But I'm not built for this kind of life." Ethan nodded slowly, pulling out his phone. With practiced movements, he opened his notes app and made a quick entry. Jessica watched him, confused. "What are you doing?" "Just making a note of the date and time of this conversation," he said calmly. "For future reference." "Future reference for what?" "You'll find out soon enough." He slipped the phone back into his pocket and looked at her one last time. "These patterns of behavior you're all so fond of, they seem to target a very specific type of person, don't they? But I wonder if any of you have stopped to consider who you're really dealing with." The end game began 3 weeks later at Marcus Wellington's penthouse warming party in Russian Hill. Jessica had been bold enough to invite Ethan, perhaps thinking his public humiliation would be the final nail in their marriage's coffin. Marcus was everything Harold could have wanted in a son-in-law: tall, confident, white, and rich enough to make other rich people feel comfortable. He moved through his party like a shark through familiar waters, and Jessica orbited him like a moon, desperate for reflected light. Ethan arrived fashionably late, wearing the same off-the-rack suit he'd worn to their wedding. The contrast between him and the other guests was stark and intentional. While everyone else wore clothes that cost more than most people's rent, Ethan looked like exactly what he'd been pretending to be for 3 years, a man who shopped at discount stores and counted every dollar. Well, Marcus announced as Ethan entered the living room. "The mysterious husband finally graces us with his presence." His smile was predatory, the kind alpha males wore when they were about to establish dominance. "Jessica's told me so much about you." The conversation in the room died. 30 people turned to watch what promised to be an uncomfortable spectacle. Jessica stood beside Marcus, her hand resting possessively on his arm, her face flushed with champagne and anticipation. "Has she?" Ethan replied calmly, accepting a glass of wine from a passing server. "All good things, I hope." "Oh, absolutely." Marcus's grin widened. "She tells me you're in technology? Between jobs, if I understand correctly?" Something like that. The group had formed a loose circle around them now, like spectators at a prize fight. Harold appeared at the edge of the crowd, his eyes bright with malicious anticipation. "You know, Ethan, can I call you Ethan? I've always been fascinated by people who reinvent themselves." Marcus's voice carried just enough condescension to be insulting while maintaining plausible deniability. "It takes real courage to start over at your age, especially in today's competitive market." Jessica laughed, high and nervous. "Marcus just closed on another property in Pacific Heights. A $12 million Victorian. Can you imagine?" "No," Ethan said simply. "I really can't." The honesty of his response seemed to deflate some of Marcus's swagger, but Harold stepped in to keep the show going. "Perhaps we should discuss the elephant in the room," Harold announced to the group. His lawyer's voice cut through the tension like a scalpel. "My daughter deserves better than uncertainty. She deserves security, stability, a future she can count on." "Daddy, please," Jessica whispered, but there was no conviction in her protest. "No, sweetheart. Someone needs to say it." Harold's eyes locked on Ethan's. "Some men build empires. Others just exist in the shadows of better men. There's no shame in knowing which category you fall into." The cruelty was breathtaking in its precision. Harold had just called Ethan worthless in front of 30 witnesses, and everyone was waiting to see how he'd respond. Would he explode in anger? Slink away in humiliation? Fight back with words he couldn't support with actions? Ethan did none of those things. Instead, he pulled out his phone and made another note in his app. The gesture was becoming familiar, his strange little habit of documenting moments. Some of the guests exchanged glances. Was this man actually taking notes at his own humiliation? "Interesting theory," Ethan said, sliding the phone back into his pocket. "I suppose we'll see how it holds up under scrutiny." The comment hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun. There was something in his tone, not anger, not desperation, but something colder, something patient. Harold's confident smirk flickered for just a moment. "What's that supposed to mean?" Marcus demanded. "It means that assumptions can be dangerous things," Ethan replied, finishing his wine. "They can lead people to make decisions they might later regret." Jessica stepped forward, her face flushed with wine and anger. "Stop being so cryptic, Ethan. Just stop. Everyone here knows what's happening. Everyone knows this marriage is over. Can't you just accept it with some dignity?" "Dignity." Ethan repeated the word like he was tasting it. "That's an interesting choice of words, coming from someone who's been conducting an affair in public for the past 6 months. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Jessica went white. Marcus's confident grin vanished entirely. "How dare you?" Harold snarled, stepping forward. "How dare you make accusations?" "I'm not making accusations," Ethan interrupted, his voice still perfectly calm. "I'm stating facts. Facts that have been documented rather thoroughly as it happens." For the first time that evening, Harold looked uncertain. "Documented by whom?" "By people who are very good at their jobs." Ethan set down his empty wine glass and looked around the room at all the faces staring at him. "But don't worry. You'll be hearing from them soon enough." He walked toward the door, then paused and turned back one last time. "Oh, and Jessica? You might want to talk to your father about the legal ramifications of conspiracy to commit fraud. Just a suggestion." The door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving 30 of San Francisco's elite in stunned silence. The final act played out exactly where Harold had planned it. Le Bernardin in New York City, the kind of restaurant where the wine list could fund a small country and the waiters spoke in hushed, reverent tones. Harold had flown them all out for what he called the resolution meeting, complete with 2 lawyers as witnesses and Marcus there to play the role of Jessica's bright, shining future. Ethan sat across from his wife and her father, the divorce papers spread between them like a battle map. The settlement offer was insulting in its pettiness. $15,000, barely enough to cover a month's rent in a decent apartment. Harold's lawyers flanked him like bodyguards, their expressions smugly professional. "I think this is more than generous, considering the circumstances," Harold said, his voice carrying the satisfied tone of a man who'd cornered his prey. "You certainly can't claim you've contributed anything significant to the marriage's financial foundation." Jessica wouldn't meet Ethan's eyes. She sat beside Marcus, their fingers intertwined on the white tablecloth like a public declaration. "I just want this to be over," she whispered. "Oh, it will be over," Harold assured her. He turned to Ethan with the smile of a predator who'd been playing with his food long enough. "Sign the papers, and everyone can move on with their lives. Refuse, and things will get very unpleasant for you. I have witnesses who can testify to certain behavioral issues, instability, possible threats to my daughter's safety." The threat hung in the air like poison gas. Harold was prepared to destroy Ethan's reputation completely if he didn't accept their pathetic offering and disappear quietly. Ethan reached for his pen and Harold's smile widened in triumph. But instead of signing, Ethan's phone buzzed. Then Jessica's phone, then Marcus's phone, then both lawyers' phones. The synchronized chirping filled the private dining room like a digital symphony. "Excuse me," Ethan said politely, lifting his phone to his ear. The caller ID showed a name that made Harold's blood freeze. Sarah Chen, Wall Street Journal. "Ethan, this is Sarah. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important, but we need to finalize the details for tomorrow's article about the Carter Technologies IPO. The headline's going to be Tech Billionaires Company Valued at $2.3 billion in Market Debut. I just need to confirm a few quotes from you as CEO and founder." Ethan had put the call on speaker. Sarah's voice filled the suddenly dead silent dining room with the casual authority of someone discussing billion-dollar valuations like they were grocery lists. Harold's face had gone the color of old parchment. Marcus was staring at Ethan like he'd just witnessed a magic trick. Jessica's mouth was opening and closing without any sound coming out. "That timing works perfectly, Sarah," Ethan replied calmly. "I'm actually in a meeting right now discussing some personal business. But yes, let's go with that headline." He ended the call and reached into his jacket, pulling out a business card and placing it gently on the table between the divorce papers. The card was simple, elegant. Ethan Carter, CEO and founder, Carter Technologies. The silence in the room was absolute. Even the soft classical music seemed to have stopped. "Carter Technologies," Jessica whispered, her voice barely audible. "The Carter Technologies?" "The one and only," Ethan confirmed. He looked at each of them in turn. Harold's shocked face, Marcus's complete bewilderment, Jessica's dawning horror. $950 million in assets, to be precise. Interesting that you thought $15,000 would be an appropriate settlement considering. Harold's champagne glass slipped from his nerveless fingers, shattering against the marble floor in a spray of crystal and Dom Perignon. The sound seemed to break the spell, and suddenly everyone was talking at once. "This is impossible," Harold stammered. "You're unemployed. You're nobody. You're just—" "A black man you thought you could manipulate and discard," Ethan finished quietly. "Yes, I know exactly what I am to you. The question is, do you know what you are to me now?" Marcus had gone green around the gills. "Jesus Christ, Jessica, do you have any idea what you've done?" But Jessica was staring at Ethan like she'd never seen him before. 3 years of marriage, 3 years of looking down on him, 3 years of treating him like a burden she was graciously carrying, and all the while she'd been married to one of the most successful tech entrepreneurs in the country. "Ethan," she whispered, reaching across the table toward him. "I don't understand. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you—" "Tell you what?" His voice was ice cold now, all pretense of warmth finally abandoned. "Tell you that you'd married exactly the kind of man you claimed to love? Tell you that your romantic rebellion was actually a fairy tale come true? What would have been the point?" She was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks in black rivers. "But I loved you. I did love you in the beginning." "No," Ethan said simply. "You loved the idea of me. You loved rebelling against your father. You loved playing the martyr who'd chosen love over money. But the moment it became inconvenient, the moment it actually cost you something, you revealed who you really are." He stood up, straightening his cheap suit jacket with dignity that no amount of money could buy. "And now you know who I really am. The question is, was it worth it?" The legal machine that Carter Technologies had assembled moved with the precision of a Swiss watch and the relentlessness of a glacier. Within 48 hours of the Le Bernardin meeting, Harold Mills received the first wave of lawsuits, criminal charges for attempted extortion, civil suits for defamation, and ethics complaints filed with the California State Bar. The media picked up the story with the hungry enthusiasm of sharks scenting blood. "Prominent SF lawyer attempts to extort tech billionaire," read the Chronicle's headline. "The $950 million marriage con," screamed the New York Post. By the end of the week, Harold's face was on every business news program in the country, and not in a good way. Ethan watched the coverage from his corner office in the Carter Technologies Tower, 30 floors above the San Francisco streets where he'd first met Jessica. His legal team had done their work with surgical precision. Every recorded conversation, every documented threat, every witness to the years of racial intimidation had been compiled into an airtight case that would have made Harold proud if he'd been on the winning side. The California State Bar moved first. Harold's law license was suspended pending investigation, effectively ending a 30-year career in a single administrative action. The criminal charges followed quickly: conspiracy to commit fraud, extortion, witness intimidation. The DA's office was particularly interested in Harold's threat to fabricate assault charges, a conversation that had been captured in crystal-clear digital audio. Marcus Wellington's world crumbled even faster. The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit had been investigating his real estate empire for months, following a trail of suspicious transactions and offshore accounts. Ethan's investigators had simply handed them the final pieces of the puzzle. Money laundering, tax evasion, and investor fraud charges landed on Marcus like an avalanche. His bail was set at $5 million, money he didn't have, since most of his assets had been frozen pending investigation. Jessica faced her own reckoning. The conspiracy charges were serious enough, but the public humiliation was far worse. Her social media accounts, where she'd once posted carefully curated images of her privileged life, became comment sections filled with vitriol from people who'd followed the story. "Gold digger gets karma," read one typical response. "Imagine being married to a billionaire and being too stupid to know it," read another. The divorce settlement, when it was finally resolved, bore no resemblance to Harold's original $15,000 insult. California's community property laws were quite clear about marital assets, and Ethan's lawyers were very good at their jobs. Jessica would receive her legally mandated share, but only after legal fees, which would be substantial, and only of assets acquired during the marriage, which Ethan's team had meticulously documented were minimal. The prenup Harold had been so eager to impose worked both ways. Ethan's only public statement came in the form of a LinkedIn post that was shared thousands of times within hours. The truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how deep some people try to bury it. Justice delayed is not justice denied. Sometimes it's just justice being thorough. The post was accompanied by a link to the Carter Foundation for Financial Abuse Victims, a nonprofit organization Ethan had quietly established to help men and women who'd experienced manipulation and exploitation in relationships. The foundation's mission statement was simple: everyone deserves to be valued for who they are, not what they can provide. 6 months later, Ethan stood in what had once been a warehouse in Oakland, now transformed into a counseling center and legal aid clinic. The space was bright and welcoming, with comfortable seating areas and private consultation rooms where people could speak freely about their experiences without judgment. The Carter Foundation had grown beyond anything he'd originally envisioned. What started as a response to his own experience had become a resource for hundreds of people, men who'd been financially manipulated by partners, women who'd been gaslit about their earning potential, individuals from all backgrounds who'd been made to feel worthless because of their economic circumstances. The hardest part, Ethan said to the small group of journalists who'd requested an interview, wasn't the manipulation itself. It was the isolation. When you're being systematically torn down by people who claim to love you, you start to believe their version of reality. You start to think maybe you really are worthless. Maybe you really don't deserve better. He gestured around the bustling center, where counselors worked with clients and legal advocates reviewed cases. This place exists because no one should have to face that kind of psychological warfare alone. Money doesn't determine your worth as a human being, but unfortunately, some people use it as a weapon to make others feel small. One of the reporters asked the obvious question: do you regret the deception? 3 years is a long time to maintain a false identity. Ethan considered the question carefully. I regret that it was necessary. I regret that genuine love felt so impossible to find that I had to go to those lengths to discover it. But I don't regret learning the truth about the people in my life. Sometimes the only way to see who someone really is to see how they treat you when they think you have nothing to offer. The center's director, Maria Santos, had been one of the foundation's first clients. A software engineer whose ex-husband had convinced her she was unemployable and worthless after a career break to raise their children. Now she ran programs that helped other women rebuild their confidence and economic independence. Mr. Carter's story resonated with so many people because financial abuse is incredibly common and incredibly hidden, Maria explained to the reporters. It happens across all demographics, all income levels, all racial and ethnic groups. The foundation gives people tools to recognize it and resources to escape it. Ethan nodded, watching through the window as clients came and went throughout the afternoon. I had advantages that most people don't have: resources, legal connections, the ability to document everything that was happening. Most people in abusive situations don't have those advantages. They're truly trapped. If this foundation can level the playing field even a little bit, if it can help even one person recognize their worth, then everything that happened was worthwhile. The interview wrapped up as the sun began to set over the Bay Area. As the reporters packed their equipment, one of them asked a final question. What would you say to other people who might be going through something similar right now? Ethan was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the city where he'd been humiliated and ultimately vindicated. I'd tell them that their value as a human being isn't determined by their bank account or their job title or what kind of car they drive. I'd tell them that real love doesn't come with conditions or ultimatums or shame. And I'd tell them that justice might take time, but it has a way of finding its target eventually. As the camera pulled back for the final shot, Ethan stood silhouetted against the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office, the San Francisco skyline spreading out behind him like a constellation of possibilities. The Carter Technologies logo glowed softly on the wall behind him, not ostentatious but unmistakably present. If you've ever been made to feel like you're not enough, he said, his voice carrying the weight of hard-earned wisdom, If someone has ever tried to convince you that your dreams are too big or your worth is too small, if you've ever been judged by the contents of your wallet instead of the contents of your character, remember this: they don't get to decide your value. Only you get to decide that. He turned to face the camera directly, and for the first time in the entire story, his smile was genuinely warm. Don't let anyone make you smaller to fit their limited imagination of who you should be. Stand up, speak your truth, demand the respect you deserve. And remember, sometimes the person you think has nothing to offer might just surprise you. The screen displayed the Carter Foundation's website and phone number as Ethan's final words echoed. The people who underestimate you based on appearance or assumptions are revealing their own limitations, not yours. They're telling you exactly who they are. Believe them. But more importantly, show them exactly who you are. Justice isn't just about what you can prove in court. Sometimes justice is simply living well and lifting others up along the way. The camera lingered on his face for a moment longer, capturing something that hadn't been there in those first courthouse steps. Peace. Not the peace of someone who'd gotten revenge, but the peace of someone who'd found purpose in their pain. Know your worth. Stand your ground. Justice finds its way. The words appeared on screen as the image slowly faded to black, followed by the hashtags "Truth Always Wins," "Know Your Worth." In the end, Ethan Carter had gotten something far more valuable than revenge. He'd gotten the chance to transform his experience into hope for others, and in doing so, had redefined what strength really looked like.